Yes, indeed. Stick your new world order up your arse, as we all say. Right, the first song, double meaning. Obviously, Aretha Franklin passed away today, and I picked that song in particular. A change is going to come. We're on the precipice of many things, and some of the intel is a bit too delicate to be putting out at this time. But what I will say is progress is being made in leaps and bounds. And there may be some hints along the way in the show. Right, let's get into the links for the show. And the link is www.spreaker.com/user/8955881. And all the past archives are on that link as well. And we've got the what we call the articles website called thinkdifferent.thepeoplesclub.org, and you can listen live there. You can also listen live, and there's articles about ground and centering and shielding and self-empowerment and solutions and a whole heap on there. So go and have a look at that at thinkdifferent.thepeoplesclub.org. We have the Facebook page, Truth, Honour and Integrity, and also the alternative social media to Facebook without all the data privacy issues and algorithms and fun and games at MeWe.com. That's also called the Truth, Honour and Integrity. Some people have difficulty finding it, so you can send an email, which is you can also send comments and questions to, and that's truth.honour.and.integrity@gmail.com. truth.honour.and.integrity@gmail.com. We have the People's Club, which is the foundation which we're waiting to get started, so at thepeoplesclub.org. And we have the Patreon, which is a fund for me to keep going in difficult times, and that's at patreon.com/TommyW/memberships. For the people who donated, once again, thank you. And a reminder that the funds are come out of your account or off your card, or whichever way you've paid it, on the 1st of each month. So be aware of that. Announcements, just the one this week. I was speaking to Alan of OYM Radio over the weekend, and he was mentioning about some people are interested in doing their own radio shows, and the more the merrier. I took part in a new one. Well, it's not a new one. It's a restart, shall we say, from an old show going back from 2009, and that's called Shift Happens, I think. Memory serves me correctly. But Alan said anyone who wishes to start up their own radio show to contact him, and he will give them all the help that they need. Like I said, the more the merrier. You know, when I started THI and also back in CV, my first appearance on OYM, I mentioned about the issues of alt media, that it's not as clean as we all like to think. And Alan sent me a post today, and I'm thinking, yep, I did warn you that there'll be only a few left, and literally it is only a few that are not corrupted. And that's sad in many ways. So the more we get people involved, the better, because, you know, for every show like THI and Randy and OYM, there's a couple of dozen of rogue elements, and so we're going to have to monitor that going forward. But slowly but surely they're being eroded away, a bit like the cabal really, who ran or run most of these groups. Right. Before we go into the news, there's something that I needed to say. And it's based on what's been going on the page. And some comments that come in. Now, some people have said our show is too long and it should be shortened. And some said there's too much information. And some want it longer and some want the show more frequent. And it's a case of you can't please all of the people all of the time. Now, the issue is we cover many topics each week from many different levels. And there may be a case of increasing the shows, and that will be looked into as time moves on. We're getting to a point where Thursday to Thursday is not adequate, but time is always a factor, and we will look into that. If anything major happens, I will always arrange a special show at short notice. So, now, the key to it all is not me or the shows. The key to it is you, the listener, and what you do with the information contained within each show. Now, I see some asking questions on stuff that has been recently covered in the show, which suggests some people are just not following the show. And that's okay. That's their choice. But how are you going to grasp what is unfolding if you're only listening to the show randomly? The answer is you can't, and hence the confusion that you face on certain items. Like I said, this show covers many topics each week, so you, the listener, can get a grasp of what's going on and make some sense of the madness that pervades this world. A chance to connect the dots that appear to never end, trust me. And this show, it kind of gets put together and it consumes a lot of time. Not just the 3 hours each Thursday, but it's done in a way so that you all have a chance to get as much of the news as possible, and more importantly, try to connect the dots. And this is what this show does. It connects the dots. In essence, our show is kind of unique in many aspects, as it's like a school where you actually learn stuff and not digest bullshit. Do we have everything right? No. Has much been validated? I think most of you would answer yes. So the choice is yours of how much you wish to learn. It is 3 hours out of your week, and I would suggest another hour studying the transcripts for things to sink in. We now post the transcripts of the shows, maybe a week or two after. The important parts, not the Q&A, not the news items, which is being posted on the Patreon site, and for the paying patrons initially, and then it gets released publicly. And you could always add another few hours absorbing and processing and trying to tie things in for yourself. This is how you get it. So it's roughly 6 hours out of a 168-hour week for you to keep on top of most things that is going on. And it's ultimately your choice to decide how you use your time. But if you find you are missing out on things, then the answer lies within you. This stuff is not something you can dabble at. You can jump in and out here and there. Particularly now with the news coming out from all angles. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it true, some of it neutral, and some of it, a whole heap of it, a whole lot of bullshit. Sorry, but it just is. And it does require much focus if you are, at the very least, to get some kind of grasp as to what's playing out. And that's your responsibility, and something many people will have to learn again going forward, as asking for others to do things for you led to the control system we have today. A much reduced one, I might add, but still too many are waiting for others to do things for them that they are capable of doing themselves. And to be honest, that's got to stop if we really want to change the world. So you have to just try to accept in a roundabout way this quote: "We are in paradise when we are seeing and understanding something new. Our God should be change. Our religion should be understanding. Searching for truth is our greatest social challenge and also purpose." Right, let's get into some of the news. And you don't know where to start, when to stop with all the news coming out. There's literally bedlam going on in all countries. Factions playing here, mercenaries playing there, threats going on, and counter threats. You have no idea. Anyway, the first news is the DNC, Democratic National Committee, last Friday served a lawsuit against WikiLeaks. Now, this plays into Assange, and we're going to see an extraordinary name outed as playing a role when this comes out. And they want to serve the lawsuits to the exclusive group that has thus far been unresponsive, and CBS News first reported last month, and the DNC filed a motion with a federal court in Manhattan requesting permission to serve its complaint to WikiLeaks on Twitter, of all places, a platform the DNC argued that the website uses regularly. Anyway, they filed the lawsuit in April, initially against the Trump campaign, Russian government, and also WikiLeaks, alleging a massive conspiracy to tilt the 2016 election in Donald Trump's favour. Now, all of the DNC's attempts to serve the lawsuit via email failed, and the DNC said last month's motion to the judge, which ultimately was approved, and the lawsuit was served through a tweet from a Twitter account last Friday by Cohen Milstein, the law firm representing DNC in the suit, with the intent of serving it. And essentially, they're trying to pressure, or Ann is, and Obama and others hinted at last week, into the people of Ecuador revoking Julian Assange's citizenship, and so then throwing him out of the embassy. At that point, they think they're going to drag him over to America and spout a load of lies, which will be blackmailed out of him, because the truth is there was no collusion and there is no Russian conspiracy, and in fact, actually there was. That was done by the Democratic Party, not Mr. Trump. So that's what they're trying to do, and like most other things, that'll fail. So the Federal Reserve last Friday, there's another one, has found the Citigroup. Of course, that's been changed name now after Kim sold it for $1 over shoddy mortgage documentation practices at its subsidiary. And the Fed said back in 2015, Citi Financial mishandled customers' files as it was preparing to wind down its mortgage servicing business. Yes, indeed, before everything collapsed around them. And the regulator said that the problem occurred in 2015 and was corrected, and Citi Financial exited that line of business in 2017. Yeah. And the Fed also said it was terminating a separate 2011 enforcement action against Citigroup on a separate residential mortgage loan servicing matter, citing sustainable improvements by the bank. In other words, it's not in the same hands. Where are we next? Another sign that the millionaires and billionaires are no longer allowed to circumvent the law. This time the Broadcom co-founder and billionaire Henry T. Nicholas III was arrested in Vegas this week on suspicion of narcotics trafficking after police discovered heroin, cocaine, meth and ecstasy in his suite in the hotel. And Las Vegas police detained him and a woman by the name of Ashley Fargo. Wonder if she's related to Wells the Fargo, as in what the last Tuesday the police were called to the room, and the security reported finding contraband in the room, and Nicholas and Fargo were arrested and booked on suspicion of trafficking, and both have since been released. With being a billionaire, he can make bail. One wonders whether he'll go missing. So, not a surprise. We did tell you the strategy of what would happen, and this guy's name was mentioned. And in quite a remarkable attack on a political opponent, Mr. Trump decided he'd had enough of John Brennan, the CIA director under Barack Obama, and revoked his security clearance, citing what he called Mr. Brennan's erratic behaviour. Now, this was threatened last month, and also other Obama administration officials, including Susan E. Rice, James Clapper, and I suspect they won't be too far behind. In fact, from what I gather, there is 9 to follow. At the time, Ms. Sanders said that Mr. Trump was considering doing it because they politicised and in some cases monetised their public service and security clearances. Interesting terminology, read between the lines on that. Mr. Trump has questioned the loyalties of national security and law enforcement officials and dismissed some of their findings, particularly the conclusion that Moscow had intervened in the election. I'm getting tired of saying that. Here's another name that's going to get increasingly popular in the portal people. For the new members, that's called the mainstream media. The water treatment was bureaucratic jargon for waterboarding, and 11 newly released top-secret cables from the time that Gina Haspel, who's now the new CIA director, oversaw the base, provided at times graphic details on the techniques the agency used to brutally interrogate Al-Qaeda captives. Agency leaders and officers were racing to uncover what they feared were large-scale plots against the United States in the chaotic months and years after the September 11 attack. I warned about Haspel. I'm not thinking she's going to last long, but she will expose certain others. Mr. Trudeau and his circle gets narrower by the day as more and more of his associates gets exposed. Here's another one. Christopher Charles Ingvaldsen, a long-term close friend of Justin Trudeau, has been found guilty of child pornography charges after being caught directing an international pedophile ring. Mr. Ingvaldsen pled guilty in BC Provincial Court in Vancouver to accessing child pornography and possession of child porn. Now, initially he was charged with 2 counts of importing or distributing child pornography, and at the time he was charged, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police said that 11 members of the pedophile ring in 3 countries, Canada, Australia and the UK, had also been arrested in those countries. Now, Mr. Trudeau and Ingvaldsen have been closely linked since their days as roommates at college, and after completing their teaching degrees, they were both accepted to teach at West Point Grey Academy. Oh dear. Look that up. An elite Vancouver private boarding school. Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Trudeau's close associates are getting pulled in by the Munter teams. Maybe one day he'll get pulled in. Now, the big news this week, the chemical giant Monsanto has been ordered to pay $289 million damages to a man who claimed herbicides containing glyphosate that has caused cancer. Now, this landmark case, which is only the first, there will be many more. The Californian jury found that Monsanto knew its Roundup and Ranger Pro weed killers were dangerous and had failed to warn its customers. Now, this was the first lawsuit to go on trial, and of course Monsanto denies that the glyphosate causes cancer and says it intends to appeal against the ruling. The jury had got it wrong. No, actually they got it right. You just don't want to pay. It's as simple as that. And the claimant in the case, groundskeeper Dwayne Johnson, is among more than 5,000 similar plaintiffs across the US, and correspondents say the California ruling is likely to lead to hundreds of other claims against Monsanto, which is now called Bayer, which means Rothschilds. Bayer, Bauer, Rothschilds, all the same. More people deciding they've had enough of what the fun and games is going on, and this time in Romania and the capital Bucharest on Saturday, and there was clashes between demonstrators and riot police that left over 400 injured, and the rallies have been spearheaded by expats who claim that they had been forced to leave the country due to corruption, and the demonstrators carried Romanian, European Union and other flags, and many preferred to sit in the central square protesting the violence. Of course, the riot police were sent out and fired tear gas and water cannons to quell the protesters, claiming later that it was hooligans who started the violence. So another country deciding they'd have enough. The US dollar is going to come under heavy fire in the coming days, as this is going to be a tipping point in many ways. And according to the Russian finance minister Anton Siluanov, he said the US dollar is not a reliable tool for payments anymore in international trade, and payments in national currencies might be used instead. You're going to see a lot more of this. And the finance minister expressed doubt that the internationally recognised currency is reliable, and also said he does not rule out the possibility of switching to national currencies in oil trade. Put two and two together with that. We have significantly reduced our investment in US assets. Yes, they have. They've sold a whole heap of US Treasury bonds off, which is a concern at this point, but it will work is underway to correct many of the issues going on in the financial world. Now, this statement comes after Washington announced plans to target Moscow with a new round of sanctions, which could reportedly include exports of sensitive national security goods to Russia, and the measures come in response to poisoning, according to them, of former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter in the UK, which all Western nations jumped on board and blamed Russia without providing any evidence. This is a short story that people may want to start looking into, as it smacks of Nexium and other types. A building in Santa Cruz, California, is being converted into a worship space and public brewery by a pro-gay church that plans to donate some of its beer proceeds to Planned Parenthood. Really? Now, Planned Parenthood has offices in the former bookstore Van Hall plans to turn into a brewery by the next month, and the church that serves beer and gives the profits away to places like Planned Parenthood is really exciting to me, the pastor said. Really. I think the pastor's lost the plot. Or perhaps he hasn't. Perhaps it's all part of the plan. So the FBI this week, in the other big political news, finally fired Agent Peter Strzok, who had helped lead the Bureau's investigation into Russian interference until officials discovered that he'd been sending anti-Trump texts. Now, Eitan Goldman, who is Strzok's lawyer, said FBI Director David Bowditch ordered the firing on Friday, and even though the director of the FBI office that normally handles employee discipline had decided Strzok should face only a demotion and a 60-day suspension. But Goldman said the move undercuts the FBI's repeated assurances that Strzok would be afforded the normal disciplinary process. Now, the termination marks quite a remarkable downfall for Strzok, who is a 22-year-old veteran of the Bureau and who had investigated Russian spies in the past. Defense officials also accused of selling secrets to China and a myriad of other important cases. And he was integral to two of the Bureau's most high-profile investigations, the Russian case and the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server while she was Secretary of State. Message from me, perhaps they really need to look at his wife rather than Peter. She's the SCE director, Melissa Hodgman Strzok. She was appointed a couple of days after the Clinton Foundation. To investigate Clinton? No. Melissa Hodgman Strzok has been blocking the FBI's probe into the Clinton Foundation for the past 21 months and counting. I did tell you all a few months back, watch the wives. They're all in it up to the neck. Now, Mr. Trump this week blasted Omarosa Manigault Newman as being wacky after she leaked a secretly taped phone call with him amid promotion of a new book. He called her vicious but not smart, and saying White House Chief of Staff John Kelly considered her a loser. I would say this is more BS-ery, to be quite honest, and it's the next line of distraction after the Slapper Daniels, you know. But these books, in case you didn't notice, all come out just before elections, and it's all designed to sway the people sitting on the fence. Most of it is lies and self-fulfilling, and all of it will get found out eventually. So this woman is accusing Trump of using the N-word and being against blacks. And that's essentially what it is, to tip the black vote. So she's using the race card to say Trump said this and Trump said that about blacks to create more division under the banner that only black lives matter. No, all people's lives matter. Now, what I'm pleased to see in some of the reports and some of the blogs and forums is it seems that the black community are not buying her and her puppet string holders BS anymore. They fell for Obama. He was going to be their saviour. I mean, seeing how that turned out for the black people, they actually were worse off. But the reality is the tide has turned on this type of nonsense, and the public are just not buying it anymore. But do expect more of the divide and conquer from portal people here on in, until they erode away to nothing, which is happening. I'll leave for time. Okay. How far have we got to go? I better skip them too. Tesla. Student loans. Now, this is something we may well look at with the trust once we get the first phase out of the way. There's many more phases to come. But more than 1 million student loan borrowers each year go into default. 1 million per year. And the outstanding education debt in the US has now tripled over the last decade, thanks to Obama and Hillary, and it now exceeds $1.5 trillion in total debt, which sounds a lot, but in real terms that can be fixed, and we will look at it. And it's posing a greater burden to Americans more than car or credit card debt. For many, the payments are proving unmanageable. Yes, that's why they did it. Now, it's forecast by 2023, nearly 40% of borrowers are expected to default on their student loans. And that's when a person has not made a payment towards their education debt in roughly a year. So there's, they call it default when you haven't paid for a year. So there's 1 million people who haven't paid that debt for a year. Wow. Which then triggers it to be sent to a third-party collection agency. Oops. They have no authority, no real authority. The debt doesn't belong to them. And you had no contract with the third-party collection agency. How we can fix, with or without the trust, the student loan debt, is all the big corporations that pay little or no tax, charge them 5% straight off the bat and send the funds and eliminate all the student loan debts. Seems fair to me. They're the ones that reaped all the profits. 5% is not a lot, but it means a lot to all those people who are struggling with that debt that most of them can never repay, on the reality of most being on minimum wage. So you pay all this money for to be dumbed down to get a minimum wage job. Is it worth going? Doesn't seem like it to me. So that would be a solution. 5% tax on all the big corporations straight off the bat, and send all the funds and eliminate all the student loan debts until it's paid. More fun and games in Afghanistan. That's been going on 17 years. Greatest military in the world, oh my. And the latest conflict and reports about whether or not the Taliban, which it has taken the strategic city of Ghazni between the Afghan capital of Kabul and Kandahar. And it reflects the dilemma and the difficulties that the American forces face today. Well, they wouldn't have any, just bring them home. Simple as that. The concerns comes despite the firepower and technology that the US has applied against an insurgent force, which has taken over more than 50% of the country. And this is despite America having almost completely driven out all of the Taliban when it first invaded back in 2001. So now they've got 50% back. And the battle for Ghazni, and indeed the effort to defeat the Taliban in remote areas of the country, suggests, notwithstanding the intelligence, technology and communications capabilities at its disposal, is that the US is losing the battle to secure the country. All very reminiscent, I might add, of what happened in Vietnam, is it not? It's like history repeating itself. But one intelligence official recently told the writer of this piece, if the US were to pull out its troops of Afghanistan, Kabul and the corrupt US-installed government there wouldn't last beyond a week, despite 16 years of the American forces fighting it. So if the troops pulled out, the corrupt US-installed government wouldn't last beyond a week. You know, you can't make this stuff up. So we've got a government and a rogue government in there, and they can't run their own country. The reality is no foreign invader has ever taken over Afghanistan permanently. Like the Viet Cong, the Taliban know that it just needs to wait out the US, seeing the opposition that grew in the US to the Vietnam War, and that the people would pull it back. With the same concerns that are now mounting in Congress, the question is, how long will American forces remain in Afghanistan? Preferably tomorrow. We'll ignore Alex Jones's lawsuit. He's kind of irrelevant. Jones has had his FCC license shut down or temporarily pulled. US Attorney Office in Massachusetts this week announced a $4.9 billion settlement with the Royal Bank of Scotland, resolving federal civil claims that RBS Group subsidiaries in the US misled investors in the underwriting and issuing of residential mortgage-backed securities. Same thing again. This was between 2005 and 2008, and the penalty is the largest imposed by the Justice Department for the financial crisis area misconduct at a single entity under the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery and Enforcement Act of 1989. That particular act allows the Justice Department to seek civil penalties for violations of criminal statutes. And the lawsuit holds RBS accountable for defrauding the people and institutions that form the backbone of our investing community, according to Andrew Lelling, the US Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. Now, despite assurances by RBS to the investors, its investors, RBS deals were backed by mortgage loans with a high risk of default. And they said, our settlement today makes it clear that institutions like RBS cannot evade responsibility for the damage caused by their illicit conduct, and serves as a reminder that the Justice Department and this office will hold those who engage in fraudulent conduct accountable. I'm glad you said that, because one hopes that they will go on and investigate and recover the $15 trillion sent by the Federal Reserve to the Royal Bank of Scotland and other UK banks in 2008-2009 period. That bailed them all out with Americans' money. 3 transactions, Pure Heart Investments, Rothschilds, that went to the Royal Bank of Scotland, HSBC, Barclays and a few others, Santander. 3 transactions of 5 trillion. I think it was February 2009, if memory serves me correctly. Pope Francis now coming under fire. Not that he's relevant much. The reality is, for people who don't know, Pope Francis is 6 layers down from the top level of the Vatican, which is the Black Pope, Clovenbeck. The Grey Pope is 3. Anyway, he stood in the window of the Apostolic Palace looking over St. Peter's Square this week and blessed the crowds that had gathered for the Catholic celebration called the Assumption of the Virgin Mary into heaven. Assumption. That's a rather interesting terminology that they use there, I think. But the Pope never once mentioned the latest horrific news revealed about his church, that a Pennsylvania grand jury this week just handed down a damning 1,356-page account of rampant abuse that involved 1,000 children, 300 priests, and 70 years of silence. And he said nothing. Now, the people of the grand jury said, "We, the members of this grand jury, need you to hear this," the report began. But there was no sign on Wednesday that Pope Francis was listening. No, they won't. Not once did he offer a prayer for the victims of his own churchmen who have been suffocated under a veil of complicity and shame for decades. Now, the Pennsylvania report outlines decades of violence abuse against both boys and girls, and when some of those girls got pregnant by their priests, they were forced to have abortions. Of course, you all know what happened to the fetus. Alcohol was often used to prime the victims, who were humiliated and made to feel guilty for their predators' sins. And one little boy named George was even made out to act out the crucifixion in the nude while priests took Polaroid pictures they later passed around and sent to online pedopornography sites. The priests used whips, violence and sadism in raping their victims, the report states. And the victims were also given gold crosses to wear, which became a sort of scarlet letter by which other offending priests could identify boys who had already been used and abused. And Pope Francis says nothing. Perhaps the people will have its day, and so will Kevin Annett. He sent out a brief report this week regarding the Ninth Circle cult and the arrest of the Pope. By refusing to respond to the court summons, the accused are declaring their implied guilt pro confesso, as if they had confessed to the charges brought against them. Accordingly, the judgment requested by the plaintiffs is hereby granted, and all 12 of the accused are declared to be guilty of a monstrous criminal conspiracy to abduct, traffic, ritually torture and murder children. A bench warrant is hereby issued for the immediate arrest and imprisonment of the accused prior to their final sentencing, and arrests are planned for Dublin on August the 25th when the Pope visits there. I'm guessing he might pass on that trip, and I'm guessing we may have a new Pope, or it may get cancelled altogether. Final news before we go into some bits of intel that's safe to put out. But Alan Lowry, a justice on the West Virginia State Supreme Court, who literally wrote the book on political corruption, Don't Buy Another Vote, I Won't Pay for a Landslide, which he published 12 years ago, that took aim at the sordid culture of grift and graft in his home state. Well, it's all backfired on him, because this week, in an ironic piece to his book, Mr. Lowry found himself at the centre of a political scandal. He and his 3 other colleagues on the highest court in West Virginia were impeached over financial abuses and extravagant spending, such as the $363,000 that Lowry, who faces a 23-count federal indictment, dropped on renovations just for his office. And the way the justice seemed to burn through money was, in the eyes of many, has outraged the legislators and is a clear abuse of power. And this is all coming in a state that's in a bad way, and poor and cash-strapped state, where 18% of the population lives in poverty in West Virginia. And the 11 articles of impeachment passed in the State House last Monday, setting the stage for a trial in the Senate, and they've all been booted. Right, people just not getting away with things anymore. People are being exposed. Banks are being fined, although I wish some of the money would, in fact, actually I wish all the money was going back to the people whose mortgages they misused. Afghanistan's fallen apart. Student loans could easily be fixed with solutions. More nonsense in the portal, people. With books being written and things being said and tweets and texts and all this nonsense. It's all to cover up, essentially, that they're badly losing the inner war. This is what we've been talking about. I'm going to end on a more positive note before we go into the music break, as after 328 days, 1.5 million customers that lost electricity across Puerto Rico, which caused the largest blackout in US history. It's actually Puerto Rico, not US, but there you go. The government yesterday announced that it's restored power to the last neighbourhood that lost electricity after Hurricane Maria. 328 days to put the electric back on. Why? So, because they thought they could do to Puerto Rico what they did with Haiti. They file liens on the property because the people have lost all the jobs and they can't pay the mortgages or they can't pay the loans. And the vultures come in, like Clinton et al., and put liens on the property and confiscate them. You didn't get away with it as much this time. So, I'm happy that the Puerto Rican people have got all the electricity, and some of those that have been living in rather poor conditions in Florida can now go home, hopefully. Right, let's have a music break. We're going to go into the intel. Now, this week, the dark web and the dinar land people have been rather noisy. And yet, after the failed payout yesterday, we disturbed the sound of silence. Yes, back to life and back to reality. And for those of us with more than a single brain cell, we've been realising and saying for a long time what is known as the RV, or hashtag Operation Stupidity, will never take place. You're just all being played. I don't care if you're Langley, I don't care if you're the Pentagon, I don't care if you're this government or that government, all sitting there with your fistful of zims, dings and dongs and all the other nonsense. They're not getting paid out. You're being played. Every single one of you. I don't care how many badges you've got. You're being played. Pawns in the game. They're just spinning the wheel and spinning your single brain cells. But if you had more than one, you would have realised way before now it's impossible to pay out. Do the economics. Kim's given you the economics. If you can add up, it's fairly simple. This country is being hijacked financially, whilst you people in the Pentagon and in the military, the top end, are sitting there waiting for the Rothschilds and fake Chinese elders to pay out. It's never going to happen. The money required has never been spent by every single person for the last 500 years. Do you really think they're going to come up with that? Do you really think there's enough assets to support it? There isn't. You're being played to carry on the one world, new world order game on their behalf. Meanwhile, you're damaging, in this country and others, the whole society. All while you sit there because you think you're going to get your billions or trillions or whatever, 3 to 4 to the dollar off dinars. It was a scam and you fell for it. You've all been paid in dinars. You do realise you're not getting paid. So you've not been paid. So all the excitement this week, we're all getting paid, and even the clown himself, Keenan, chimed in this week thinking he's getting paid. All fell into silence today. Of course, there'll be more chatter tomorrow because they've promised you Friday, and then they'll promise you Monday, and then you'll promise you Wednesday, and then they'll promise you Friday and Monday, and on it goes. Meanwhile, your country is going down the toilet financially. And not only this country, there's many other countries that now can't pay this or can't pay that. CNN can't pay its light bill. Oops. How long is it before the American military stop getting a salary like other countries? While you continue with the illusion of Chinese elders. I'm going to put out a challenge to the people in the Pentagon and the agencies, I know you're listening, and any other country around the world. Come up with one name of a Chinese elder, just one, that we can speak to. Because everyone talks about Chinese elders, but from all digging on all channels, nobody has ever spoken or met one. You're being played by the Rothschilds. history will not look upon you too well if you continue this folly much longer. Trust me. Here's another group that are desperate. IMF. They're a big problem currently. But many countries now are starting to see through the illusion. The work Kim and the team have done has been nothing short of extraordinary. And certain countries, and I won't mention them or the numbers, have been making inquiries with varying degrees of success. As said before, you would be astonished at how little governments and state officials really know what's going on. You'll also be astonished at how many at the Pentagon and Langley really know what's going on either. Well, now these governments and officials globally are now learning some real truth for the first time, and it's sticking. Like they said, it goes through 3 phases of the truth. It's barely believable, the first lot, the first time you hear it, but all the dots are now being connected, thanks to Kim and the team. Now, the backlash to all this in those different countries is the IMF have been marching in, demanding payments from each country that this particular country or this particular country allegedly owes the IMF. Except now they know each country is owed massive dividends from the trust and not debt instruments from the cabal, like the IMF. So first the IMF started going around threatening all the countries. Now they've stopped that, and they are reduced to asking countries to lend them money. The IMF. Like the UN. The IMF. Neither of them have a pot to piss in. 0. They're asking countries to lend them money. All at the behest of the Rothschilds again, no doubt. They've always got their ugly faces and vessels in it somewhere. But the key now for the countries that listen in and the countries that have been threatened is to all combine together on each continent. Just because the next door neighbour country has been threatened doesn't mean you have to sit there. They'll knock on your door just as much as anybody else's. And it's up to all the countries in that region to combine together and force the pirates and the bandits out of your whole region. They have nothing to offer. They have no validity. And the funds, as Kim has promised, are there for each country. She has shown you the proof. It's all there. Once the blocking and the threats die down. And we're asking each country to hold your nerve, in spite of the threats to your country, to the leaders, and the leaders' children in some cases. It's a dying entity. Next piece. The clowns are messing with all different types of communications. All of them. This is why there's issues with mobile phones, there's issues with landlines, there's issues with the internet, there's issues with banking, which requires communications, and there's issues with ATMs. Rest assured, it won't always be this way. Every time they do something, we nullify it and they're prevented from doing it again. More hacking attempts and more blocking attempts on the quantum system took place this week. Why? Because the RV was allegedly being paid out again. And they obviously haven't got the funds, so they hack in, or try to hack into the quantum system, and once again, it all failed. Once again, the quantum system recognised it and recorded exactly who did it. Now it's up to the clowns in the top brass positions to go and arrest those people. That's your job. Eventually, though, they will be unable to hack or block. It's only a matter of time. I won't give details, but I'll just give a headline. In the past 6 weeks, there's been 3 attempts on Trump's life. And still the people sit in the 5-sided building and in the military places. And still the portal people say nothing about it. That won't always be the case either. So that's the intel for this week. I can tell you there's an awful lot more. It's just everything is very, very delicate as it stands. Progress is still being made on many levels. I'm seeing it with my own eyes and hearing it with my own ears. And it is just a matter of time. You know, I know everyone's tired and you need to get this done, you need to get that done. Trust me, you have no idea the depth of what's going on. None whatsoever. But the common thing or theme is to blame governments. And I wanted to do a piece on it, and this is what the next is. The government is blamed for a lot of things that they literally have no control over. None whatsoever. You know, those of you listen to Ancient Aliens, they talk about ET disclosure and the government's blocking it. How can the government block it when the president is 26 levels of secrecy below that level? That's the president, never mind the Congress or the House or the Senate. It's not the government blocking it. And then you have the 3, 4 and 5 letter groups with no congressional oversight, and yet people blame the government. The government were blocked out of any involvement or direct knowledge of the ET issue after the humanity treasonist Eisenhower sold us out. And this is why Kennedy tried to get the ET papers lowered to government level and signed off an agreement with his Russian counterpart at the time, Brezhnev, in November 1963. And the gist of that is America and the USSR, as it was then, would exchange all ET-related papers to each country. And this, in effect, was an attack on the secrecy levels, now known as the deep state. And the peoples in the secrecy levels go up to 49. Although I do hear that that number is now, it goes higher. A little bit higher. So whilst the president level is 23, and he signed, Kennedy signed that agreement 11 to 12 days later, Kennedy was dead. This is what the governments are dealing with. Now I would hazard caution that JFK was not all for the people. I know for a fact that it was part of a faction war. A bit like now. How far Trump's into that faction war remains to be seen at this point. But we do have a sixth faction now. It's called We the People. And boy is that growing. But the government has no control over the military. In part, this is part of the inner war described. It's the US military is either owned by the SSP, SS small p, which we can confirm, but the Rothschilds think they own it, and also the Jesuits are claiming the US military that they've owned it since the 1500s. The government has no control over income tax or receives any of it. For those new to the show, the IRS is not an American company, and it's not even on American soil. It's a trust of the Crown stationed in Puerto Rico, a collection agency for the Federal Reserve. The government has no control over the Fed or the IRS, as they are operatives for and by the Crown. The government has no control over the media, as proven more so over the past 18 months than any other time. There's a reason why Trump's calling it fake news. And if you think it's recent, it all started with CBS back in the 1920s. Now I wonder how many people realised what the C stands for. Columbia, as in District of Columbia, you know. CBS were working with OSS, now known as the CIA, to produce propaganda for the American audiences as far back as 1920. The government has no control over the SS small p, the real secret space program that's been ongoing since the 1940s minimum, part of which was the Majestic 12 until recently, and they were all taken out by the order. Bye-bye Majestic 12. Why? Because some of them in there wanted disclosure. The government has no control over policy. That is dictated way higher up. I think many of you are now seeing that. And the government has no control, and neither do the people, until possibly the last election. Time will tell on that issue of who is voted in or out. Maybe it's time to stop blaming the government for everything and target who are the real issue. But you can go and research all those facts for yourself. You'll come to the same conclusion. The government, in essence, is almost irrelevant. We think it's important. We think that they block this and they don't do this. They have no choice in it. Until we get an American government, not a USA Inc. corporation, operating as the government, like now, and some proper governing where we have oversight of all the 3-letter, 4-letter and the 5-letter groups, then you can blame the government. Until then, you have to look far higher as to who's holding the puppet strings. A couple of solutions that I've come up with. One I need to reiterate. Now, the military tribunals that we've spoken about on this show a few times is one of the solutions. That has come up again for some of the top names that are will eventually be arrested. Now, what I want to reiterate to the top brass covering those trials is it was the alternative media who drove the truth narrative that has led to the exposure of these criminal elites. And I'm requesting, again, some members of the alternative community to be in attendance of those military tribunals. Going forward, we have to be transparent, and members of our community selected should be able to observe real justice being served in the correct manner. So it's not some sideshow tribunal none of us can see or hear, and then it's wrapped up in the BS called national security for numbers of decades. No. We require transparent, instant justice, and my recommendation is John Darash and Carl Appel and members of his team at the National Liberty Alliance, the grand jury group. They know the law. I would have said Anna von Reitz as well, but she still insists on being part of the problem and not the solution. But if she drops her membership to Langley too, then fine. She would add much to the proceedings. But John and his team and Carl can then sit on the tribunal and report back how justice was served to the alternative community and not a load of BS that we get from the portal people. And they can do it in sufficient form that people will understand what took place and no need for full details to be revealed, as the reality is most people will not be able to handle the full details. We need, as a collective group that has driven this truth, to be able to oversee justice. We have a mistrust of how the military is run, a mistrust of how the government is run, a mistrust of how the judges and lawyers run, and we want to see a change. That is a change sufficient where the people can really observe. Now, my second request is, should Anne, Android, or Hillary, as she's more commonly known, be convicted in a military tribunal, one of the conditions to her remaining alive for the rest of this lifetime is she should be made an example of. And I am asking the top brass people to consider, should Hillary be convicted, she should be made to read out on all national TV stations the crimes she is being found guilty of. This has multiple implications. One, the general public gets it from the horse's mouth. No more hearsay, no more alleged conspiracy or fake news. Right out of her mouth, or he or whoever else gets charged. Two, it will start the healing process of the soul if she has one. That is no guarantee. As we all know, there's many in here who are soulless entities. But if she does, she can work off some of her karma before the next lifetime. Some people will say, why should we care about healing her? And it's a valid point. But carrying over that type of karma will go into multiple lifetimes, not one, and could lead to a continuous cycle of negativity in that soul. And what if they all beat up again in the next lifetime? One could argue that karma should be erased after this lifetime. given the interference that's been done here, maybe that's something that should be considered. We all have a fresh start. It's something that many should ponder on this piece, as I know many want an eye for an eye. But keep doing that and we all go blind. I think making Hillary confess her crimes on national TV would alter everything. And I'm hoping you consider it. Where are we next? Let's stick with the portal people. Newspapers from Maine to Hawaii have now started to push back against Donald Trump and his attacks on fake news, and apparently they're all ganging up together in a unified voice. Yes, because they're all part of the same voice and the same script is why. And it's estimated now that some 350 newspapers would participate. Who cares? Anyway, the Portland, Maine Press Herald said a free and independent press is the best defence against tyranny. It's been happening in your face for the last 70 years and you've said and done nothing. Oh my God. These people are completely stupid. Look, if you don't like getting called fake news, it's fairly simple. Stop reading out the Rothschildians and the Langley 2 and 3 scripts. It's fairly simple. You're all reading the same news. You've already been caught out on that multiple times. Those scripts are based on a failed world domination policy by a group of psychopaths. You start giving balanced reports and be proper journalists, not puppets, and read out the news that's based in our world, not theirs, then perhaps we'll all start watching the news again. Until then, you just fake news. It's as simple as that. How are we for time? Okay. Where can I go next? Let's get into some religious stuff. 4 pieces. Fairly short. But again, these are something that people need to consider. Don't shoot the messenger. Go and investigate yourself. It's all there. If you look for yourself. Now, we all learn something new every day. And I learned something, many things new in the past couple of months. And certainly a whole heap in the last 5 or 6 years. But this came up, and here's a new one for you all. All religions were a human experiment. All of them. And it was designed to see how people would react to it. Now, essentially, what it was doing was disconnecting you from source. And this has been done over a long period of time. Long period. And the outcome then would be we forget about source altogether and our connection. And an eventual worship program to the false gods. Be it Ra, Baphomet, Isis, Horus. And then this took on new forms as the experiment had obviously worked in some aspect in the past as memory of our connection to source faded over time. Except around 2,000 years ago, it took a really bad turn for the worst. In came the Christian religion and Catholicism. Experiment, not religion. And Constantine added all new layers when he was in Jerusalem. Not in the modern day Jerusalem, in Israel, but Jerusalem was in Constantinople back then. It's a transient place. Now previously Jerusalem or Jerusalem was in Russia under the guise of the Rus, the Aryans and the Urs. And around 1100 AD they then splintered the Christian group off, and there was what was known as a Muslim Islam sect, part of a Christian group. Separate religion, Muhammad and all separate? No, it came out of the Christian experiment in the 1100s. Then in the 1500s, protesting Catholics then morphed into a Protestant religion. There was no Protestant religion. It was Catholics protesting in the 1500s against the Catholic Church, who were committing untold fraud, crime and corruption. Nothing's changed 500 years later. It's all part of the same thing, one giant experiment. Now all of them are superseded in the experiment by the Torah book, which is for Hebrews only, and the Talmud book, which is for non-Hebrews. And it's my understanding that the original Hebrews are Anunnaki, either in DNA fully or are ran by them. Both are known as the chosen ones. Who told them they were the chosen ones? Under source, there are no special ones. We were all created equal. And someone comes in with a hierarchical system, they're going against your real God, if you want to use that term, which is source, which is neither male nor female. It's not called Yahweh, it's not called Yeshua, or all the other names. It just is. It's not male or female. Hierarchy is the reign of the ego for those who thought they were above creation. This is where you get all the solar gods like Ra and Horus and all those people. And the Greek and the Roman gods, they all thought that they were source. They're not. Rest assured, all of those people will meet their maker soon and find out their own folly and karma. But all religions was an experiment which went badly wrong for the people on this planet. Now the key is to reverse that and trigger memory of being in connection with Source, which you're supposed to go each at the end of each lifetime. Many of these so-called gods have learned ways to cheat creation, where they have longer lives, so they don't go back to Source so they can continue being gods. They're not really. It's all fake. Like I said, it's up to you whether you believe it or not. You can go and investigate some of the details yourself. But something you also need to ponder on to do with religion. Now, you've been told it was all an experiment, and it's up to you whether you accept that or not. But you look at some of the terminology they use. The body of Christ means entering a church. But didn't Jesus turn around and say, you don't have to go into church? The body of Christ means entering a church. Then you drink the blood of Christ and eat the flesh during Mass. Do you think that's normal? When it's overviewed, entering the body means a walk-in, and then you consume it. Is that not the very definition of a parasite? So you're entering the body of Christ by going into a church. So you are a walk-in, and then you consume the body of Christ and the blood. Parasite. Same thing. It's like the archons. It's all very lower astral level to me. Perhaps that's what it was designed for, is to keep people in the lower astral stream where the archons could feed off us or loose us like batteries. Again, something to ponder on for yourself. Now, according to scholars, one of the earliest Hebrew books was the book of Esther, Esther. Now, it was such an important book, a bit like Jesus. Why did he change the name? Well, they later renamed that book to the Children of Israel. Except the funny thing is Esther was Persian, and so Iran, which means land of the Aryans. For those of you who don't understand that and think that they're all Nazis, go and watch the series I did or listen rather, to the two-part series From Russia with Love. Explains who the real Aryans are, and it's nothing to do with Germans. So this biggest book, the book of Esther, which they changed the name to include the name Israel, which never existed prior to 1947, and the lead character, Esther, who's the queen, was Persian. It's funny how his story books change narrative over time, isn't it? Now, this next passage that I found covers the piece I did in From Russia with Love, and also the Humanity Unplugged 1 and 2, where I mentioned the real Jesus being Radomir and why he was hunted down and killed in 1086. Where it says the conversion of the Rus, the success of the conversion of the Bulgarians facilitated the conversion of other East Slavic peoples. That's the Aryan, or the Slavic Aryan. Most notably the Rus, the predecessors of the Belarusians, the Russians and the Ukrainians, as well as Rusins. By the beginning of the 11th century, which is 10-something, most of what they called pagan Slavic world, including Russia, Bulgaria and Serbia, had been converted to Byzantine Christianity. By the end of the 11th century, the real Jesus, which is Radomir, was killed. Like I said, history has a way of being written in a way that distracts from the real truth. Over time, we'll all find that out. Last piece before we have a music break, and then got a few things to cover. Still got some more op-ed pieces. We mentioned earlier about the OSS. Freudian slip. And I wanted to dig into the background, how far it goes, and people will be surprised. And prior to the formation of the OSS, the various departments of the executive branch, including the state, treasury, navy and war departments, conducted American intelligence activities on an ad hoc basis with no overall direction until the OSS came in. They had no direction, coordination or control. Now, the US Army and the US Navy had separate code-breaking departments called Signal Intelligence Service and OP-20-G, and a previous code-breaking operation of the State Department called the MI8. Sound familiar? It should be, because that's the name of the British intelligence. And MI8 was run by Herbert Yardley, and it had been shut down in 1929 by the Secretary of State Henry Stimson, deeming it inappropriate function for the diplomatic arm because gentlemen don't read each other's mail. So there was obviously spying going on in the country by the British MI8 at the time. That didn't go down too well. Now, the FBI at the time was responsible for domestic security and anti-espionage operations. But Mr. Roosevelt, who was one of 3 Germanic presidents we had on the bounce after Hoover and then Eisenhower, was apparently concerned about American intelligence deficiencies, and on the suggestion of William Stevenson, the senior British intelligence officer, not American, Roosevelt requested that William J. Donovan draft a plan for the intelligence service based on the British Secret Intelligence Service, which was MI6, and the Special Operations Executive SOE. Now, after submitting his work, the Memorandum of Establishment of Service of Strategic Information, Colonel Donovan was appointed Coordinator of Information on July the 11th, 1941, heading the new organisation known as the Office of the Coordinator of Information. They certainly love their 3-letter agencies, don't they? And thereafter the organisation was developed with British assistance, in other words, ran by the Brits. It's a bit like the NSA. It's a subsidiary of GCHQ. And Donovan has responsibilities to run it, but no actual powers. See what I mean? No oversight again. The powers were elsewhere. Donovan, like Trump and like other presidents and like the CIA, they're all puppets. And the existing US agencies were sceptical, if not hostile to that move, realising probably there's a German takeover, which we've spent the last 70 years trying to reveal. And until some months after Pearl Harbor, the bulk of OSS intelligence came from the UK. British Security Coordination trained the first OSS agents in Canada, of all places, not in America, but in Canada, until training stations were eventually set up in the US with guidance from BSC's instructors, who also provided information on how the SOE was arranged and managed, and the British immediately made available their shortwave broadcasting capabilities to Europe, Africa and the Far East, and provided equipment for agents until American production was established. You know, This is the time of the Rockefellers and mafia and big money, Warburgs and JP Morgans, and we couldn't afford our own equipment. Or was that deliberate? You can make your own choice. But for the duration of World War II, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, was conducting multiple activities and missions, including collecting intelligence by spying, performing acts of sabotage. Oh boy, that didn't stop, did it? Waging propaganda war, that certainly hasn't stopped, and organising and coordinating what they said at the time was anti-Nazi resistance groups in Europe, and providing military training for anti-Japanese guerrillas in Asia, amongst other things. Now, at the height of its influence during World War II, the OSS then employed almost 24,000 people. I can guarantee that most of them were not from America. And from 1943 to 1945, the OSS played a major role in training Kuomintang troops. You're going to hear that name a lot more going forward. There's something that most people have never heard of, and you have no idea the damage that those people do. So the OSS trained the Kuomintang troops, Kuomintang. Dragon groups is a more familiar name. And recruited, they trained the Kuomintang groups in China and Burma, and recruited Kashin and other indigenous irregular forces for sabotage, as well as guides for the Allied forces in Burma that were fighting the Japanese army. And the other activities, the OSS helped arm, train and supply resistance movements in areas occupied by the Axis powers during World War II, including Mao Zedong's Red Army in China. Also known as the Dixie Mission, and in the Viet Minh in French Indochina. And OSS officer Archimedes Patty played a central role in OSS operations in French Indochina, and frequently met with Ho Chi Minh in 1945. Now, it was said one of the greatest accomplishments of the OSS during World War II was its penetration of Nazi Germany. Well, they would, because it was the same people. That's why. And the OSS was responsible for training German and Austrian individuals for missions inside Germany. Didn't say which side they were training those German and Austrian officials for, does it? And some of these agents included exiled communists, oh my, and socialist member parties, Labour activists, anti-Nazi prisoners of war, and German and Jewish refugees. They also recruited and ran one of the war's most important spies, the German diplomat Fritz Kolbe, and the OSS First Lieutenant George Muselin behind enemy lines in Germany-occupied Serbia. They all come out on it. As a Chetnik during his first mission in November 1943. The second mission was called Operation Halyard. And in 1943, the OSS set up operations in Istanbul, Turkey, which was then a neutral country during the Second World War. They just took over everything under the guise of secret missions and spying and espionage. No, it was a coup. And Turkey was a place where both the Axis and Allied powers had spy networks, and the railroads connected Central Asia with Europe, as well as Turkey's close proximity to the Balkan states. Russia placed it at a crossroads of intelligence gathering, and the goal of the OSS Istanbul operation, called Project Net 1, was to infiltrate and extenuate subversive actions in the old Ottoman and Austrian-Hungarian empires. In other words, it was a takedown of the Aryan peoples. That's why Hitler was going on about the Aryan race, so everyone would hate on the Aryans for decades. That the idea of the Aryans were going to take over the world, it's all rubbish. They were wiping them out. That piece tells you that. Serbia, Austria, Old Ottoman, Hungary, Balkans. It was all about eliminating from history the Rus and the Slavic Aryan peoples, so they can continue to strive towards their one world government, one world religion, which the Vatican's in on, and erase all history of what essentially was the highest evolved people ever on this planet. Certainly the highest spiritually evolved people ever on this planet. Of course, World War I was about wiping the Russian Tsars out, because they actually looked after the people in the main. History books won't tell you that. History will tell you that the Russian people overthrew them. No, they didn't. The Russian people and the Tsars got overthrown and killed to the tune of 70 million. All done by the Khazarian group. So I hope you like that piece. I think we're going to run out of time tonight, and I don't think we're going to get to Q&A. We'll see, you might get a few in, because I've still got 3 or 4 or 5 pieces I still want to cover. I thought it might be too packed. Right, let's see what song is one that was recommended by one of the members. I hope you like it. Hi all and welcome back. Thing that came up, I'm going to be brief with this, on the page, and the divide and conquer debate over what people should and shouldn't eat. We've all heard the term eating meat is murder. Well, eating plants is murder as well. Because you would think plants aren't sentient beings and don't have feelings, then you're seriously misguided. Eating fish is murder. Whichever way you look at it, it just goes on and on. Should eat this and shouldn't eat that. And it's turned into a divide and conquer on a very shallow, low vibrational level. A bit like the food we're eating. Stripped of nutrients, stripped of vitamins. And the reality is, all of us currently have to eat somehow, regardless here. And people should be free to choose their own diet and not have some new age agency bullshit program making them feel bad for their choice. Sometimes it's not a choice. Sometimes it's about what they can afford. And it's all about a balanced diet on the 3D world. And until something changes, maybe we go back to eating energy. But isn't that harvesting? Think about it. Now there's a question, one of the questions, and I've kind of covered with this piece, because lo and behold, the fat Irishman, known as Neil Keenan, has decided to show his fairly different face from the Keenan a few years ago. Maybe it's not the same person. But either way, he's now back saying he's got the scepter, which looks like a silver voodoo doll, which may be useful for Drake's ET packages and butt probing. Who knows? And according to Keenan and his alcoholic drug runner, Dean Chambers, Keenan is releasing collateral accounts, and Drake is to administer the funds. Now, to me, that would be fantastic if it was true. The world needs funds. If Keenan releases it, fine. Except the reality is, like the RV, it's all bullshit. Pure and simple. Keenan works for the Rothschilds and the Chinese elders. We exposed that in May of 2016. Quite why he's decided to pop his head back up now and is beyond me. But I wonder what the other 73 M1s think of Keenan in their role. The 74 M1s running around all claiming this and that, and none of them have delivered a single thing. And are not likely to either. They've all been duped. Keenan also. We tried to warn him. Even after the bullshit he put out on me, we sent people to try and help him. He told us to go and F ourselves and made death threats. But unlike some, I and some of our members have long memories. Do people not remember? Keenan himself said in an interview in the past 12-18 months where he stated there are no collateral accounts, which caused some uproar on his page from his own followers. And now all of a sudden the accounts are back on. These collateral accounts are on and off more times than Stormy Daniels' knickers. What are they doing? And the reason for their optimism is everyone in Dinar Land, Langley, Pentagon thought they were getting paid again yesterday. But yet again, it failed. The collateral accounts is the RV, which is never going to happen. The only real account is the Manor World Holding Trust. And now people all over the world are realising it. But even if Keenan had access to any funds, apart from the funds he stole off Drake, of all people, Gene Haynes, Gregory Kachurin, and members of the CV, the idea that Keenan would give any funds or role to Drake is the most absurd claim I've ever heard yet. Keenan's contempt for Drake is fairly deep. Everyone that speaks to him knows that. Bar Drake, it seems. And Drake is playing and also being played, just like all the others. Well, Keenan given the role of fund disbursement to Drake. Oh dear. A man with that much ego doesn't give roles away. Sorry, but Keenan's not releasing anything except his mouth. Where are we next? Some people asked about a statement I may go deeper into when it's safer to do so. About I said nothing works, and it is a small piece it did. That kind of explains it in many ways. I see us as errant warriors. Errant in the sense that we are departing from a prescribed course. Think about that. We cross a threshold and then become the fabric of events altered. The news is different. Solid becomes liquid. liquid becomes vapor, and vapor becomes open space. The space is waiting for us to do something. You see, space has no plan. It's a void. It's all calm. It's all balanced. And the challenge is we assumed were there are missing. Those challenges were the last meal we consumed on the last day of old time. Now we walk and look up at the night sky, and now we can do something different. Read between the lines on that and ponder deep on that piece. Let's get into some questions, because I've got one more piece I need to finish on. Here's a rather long-winded one, which I'll go through fairly quickly. Someone saying, understands why people from other continents would want to come to America, I presume. I certainly do not blame them for wanting to seek a better way of life, and everyone is aware most of these who are coming into the West are undertaking economic migration instead of fleeing from war and tyranny. The problem with that being is quite a lot of those coming have a mindset that's non-conducive to the Western world. Right, a couple of things wrong with that opinion, which is fine, is most of these people are being deliberately forced out of their home. It's part of a deliberate plan of crashing the West so that the East takes over. And these people are pawns in the game. And the idea that they have a mindset that's non-conducive to the Western world is again part of the programming. Because when people get together, and really get together, no one is interested about religions or cultures. People just get on. It's only when the programs and the media telling you they're non-conducive to the Western world, and the mercenary elements that are being sent along with the people fleeing, they're the ones that are deliberately causing damage in the various countries, whether it be America, whether it be Britain, Holland, Sweden, you name it. They're not your average everyday folk. They are paid mercenaries to cause division and for people to have a poor opinion of those peoples. It's classic divide and conquer. Problem, reaction, solution. Here's the problem. You provide the reaction and they provide the solution. Let's go to war with Islam and the Muslims. Over and over and over again. It goes on. I've seen many videos where violence is first, not last resort. Yes, that's the mercenaries. Again, if you have something they want, they just seem to take it. All the same thing. Now, he or she goes on, I can understand a lot of the places that these people come from have been ruled by force and became their currency. What you'll find is that where those people came from was ruled by force by Western overthrow governments. All part of the control structure again. Look what happened in Ukraine. Look what happened in Iraq. They installed a Western puppet. It's all deliberate. And it makes us look weak. No, it doesn't. It makes us look stupid because we can't see through the illusion. Not weak. Then you have the religion problem. Well, I've told you about that earlier. It's an experiment, and it's a bad one that's weighed heavily on the people and cost a lot of people their lives. It seems to be an inordinate amount of these followers of Islam who believe the rest of us are inferior and irrelevant. Yes, again, it's part of the program. Islam is a Christian sect. Oops. I'm well aware that there are several no-go zones that are now under Sharia law. Yes, that was introduced by Obama and his Muslim Brotherhood, mercenaries, not Muslim people. You have to go deeper into who the real problems are. Otherwise, you're going to go with the rest of the people who are just blaming the immigrants and they're the problem. No, they're not. The problem is we haven't been taught the real truth. Where are we next? I know it's designed to cause a race war and economic collapse, correct. And they're using them poor people as the problem and you as the reaction, and then they provide the solution. I wonder though if they believe making whites extinct may lead to a diminished form of humanity. Well, this has been part of the problem. There is an issue with the white race being pushed out on this planet. And this is why, in part, we had the Nazi issue. Now, that doesn't mean to me that you have to go wiping out blacks, browns, reds and yellows. Why are people any different to bald eagles, dolphins, turtles, or other animals, tigers that are extinct? Why can't we protect the white race if, proven 100% correct, it's been diminished and diminished deliberately? Why does it only apply to birds or animals? We spend all kinds of money. There's about $2 million spent on some bizarre creature in Ireland to protect last month. And yet, if there's an actual issue that the white race is being diminished, why can't we create zones where they're allowed to rebuild the race without decimating everybody else? There's no need for it. So I've seen several European countries refuse the influxes of people seeking a new home, and I believe Russia will also not allow an ethnic replacement to apply. Russia's got more ethnic people than any other country. Listen to the series From Russia With Love. It tells you. It's not what the media tells you. That's the reality. Japan has its problems, however they have a strong identity and refuse to allow anyone to interfere with that. It says, I believe in a multicultural world, but not at the price of erasing one to replace another. That isn't any better. No. And when people start seeing through the illusion and what's really going on, then the idea of blaming the migrants or the immigrants, whether it's illegal or not, in my opinion, there's no such thing as an illegal alien. How can you be illegal on your own planet? It's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. What we have to do is start the media telling the real truth of what's going on. All of it. To hate on Muslims, to hate on Russians, to hate on Chinese, etc., 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 is all part of a program. And all of us are being used to fulfill it. And sadly, far too many are falling for the same program over and over again, like the loops. We have to stop. The idea that one American soldier is worth more than 50 or 100 Iraqi people is wrong. If one Iraqi dies, that's just as important as one Brit or one American. It's part of us. And we need to forget about countries, forget about cultures, forget about the experiment known as religion, and all come together. Because every single one of us, including the clowns in the Pentagon and the agencies and the militaries around the world, are all being played for fools. Well, we're not being fooled much longer. And it's up to the people to realise you're being played in a massive programme. Right. What are we doing? Okay. I'm wanting to know, once the cabal is not able to purchase oil and commodities, do you maybe know if the 1 million Nazi Germans living under the ice in Antarctica will turn against their leaders and retreat back for help? I'm not sure there is anywhere near that number down there, to be quite honest. There's a lot of BS being written about Antarctica, and it's kind of being left out, but some of those regions may be not there anymore. Do you know if they are totally life sustainable under the ice? Yes, because it's warm and it has a central sun, which shows at the poles, which is why you get the northern and southern lights. It's the central sun oscillating with the atmosphere, not the one in the sky. I'm aware of the technology they have in their spacecraft. However, I feel they've been receiving foods or some raw ore and other commodities to create their lifestyle. There's plenty of ways that they can be self-sustainable down there. Because not all of it is ice. Just because a picture shows it is ice doesn't mean to say it is. A bit like Greenland. Would you clarify what is happening with the water on this planet? Is it being taken off planet and or utilised by other beings? It was, and it's not now. What is added to make it living water? Nothing. It is. That's why they call water the source of all life. Does this also imply that our water is a renewable source? I have the belief that everything is renewable here. Oil in particular, even though it's 100 years out of date technology. Would the Universal Protection Unit or the Council be willing to do another show? It's possible. There was minor issues with one of those UPU girls, and I'm hoping she sees through her own illusions and comes back to reality. We'll see. Someone suggesting Trump has control of the payroll of every soldier of every military group in America, and he should consider not paying the payroll. Well, he doesn't pay the payroll, the trust has. Otherwise, no one would have been paid Social Security or your benefit checks for the last 6 months. We're coming up to that time again, and it will get interesting, and we're not giving away how we're going to approach it, but we do have leverage, so we'll see on that. So you're mentioning about them being controlled by the cabal and the Rothschilds. What you don't understand is many of them have no idea. I wonder when the world will accept the Keshe Foundation free energy system so we can get off coal, oil and gas for electricity. I've been trying to promote this for over a year, but little response, and also from government contracts also. I don't know whether it actually works. I've never seen a working model. You know, we did 3 huge events, was it 2 years ago? One in Japan, one in Rome, and one in Africa. And, these events went on whole days. And not once did he produce a working model, which makes me suspicious. If you're going to have a big publicity event, you at least have a model to show that works. And unfortunately, maybe someone can enlighten me whether they've actually got one working and it's viable. There's a lot of people saying there's this energy and there's that. We know that there are working models. Whether it's the Kesh one, doesn't really make any difference. But Kesh and his links with Ms. Cassidy didn't augur too well. In reference to prepping, what you generally recommend, have cash, have a couple of weeks of tinned food or rice, whatever. You don't have to go overboard. Nothing. There was a time when I thought it could go on longer if the whole thing collapsed. I don't think that it will be the case. I'm not saying there couldn't be disruptions, because we're getting into a time where there could be a lot of disruptions. But I don't think it will last too long. Too many are seeing through the illusion. How can we best cut off the head of the snake? As I see it, exposure, arrest, trials, then gathering the awakened people and create new think tanks to implement new tech and industries and systems. That's already been done. What we're seeing is the remnants. What alternative media voices do you recommend at this point, and which ones are you certain are compromised or not to be trusted? The only people I will recommend is Randy Morgan's and the two OYM lads, Alan and Steve. That's it. As for the rest, I'm just not saying I've said enough on those people. There's a lot of new people coming out with stuff on YouTube, but they don't have the intel that we carry. They don't have the insight. They're just passing off opinions as being something real. And there's a whole heap of also clowns on YouTube and Twitter now that are putting out a whole heap of absolute bullshit. You're going to have to be really vigilant in the next coming weeks, because everything is on a knife edge. I'll describe more of that soon. Is there any hope in Trump doing the right thing for real in reference to sovereignty, thus disbanding NATO, the Fed, Obamacare, CDC, and many other criminal operations ongoing? If there's a payout to people not guilty of high crimes who will lose their jobs in corrupt organisations, that will buy us some time to create new systems and endeavours. That's a little wide-ranging. You need to narrow the field on what types you're talking about. There have been many discussions. There's many new systems ready to roll out. There's many new technologies waiting to roll out. Here's something new ready to roll out once the clowns are ended. It's called an American government. It's called an actual constitution. Because no one who listens to this show, or anyone alive on this planet apart from a few of the dodgy others, have ever seen an American government or the real constitution. We're told to beware of AI as it can become self-aware, so they say. This idea that AI is sentient is complete and utter bullshit to me. I'm not buying it. It's just not. Just replicating. And you've also, given the main AI has now gone down, what you're dealing with is is people who have followed orders all their lives suddenly trying to do programs, and you think that system's going to become self-aware. The ones doing the programs are not even aware. You know, the difference between that and the quantum system is that will only operate for and by the people with the right intent and the right DNA, which rules out all the synths and the soulless and the zombies and the psychopaths. So as for banking AI worthy of our trust, that takes time. You know, people have got to, once the Man of World Holding Trust rolls out, I'm sure there won't be many questioning then, but we should always be aware of any issues going forward. But we have taken steps to prevent it being interfered with. You know, the clowns seem to think they can drag the people who work with the quantum system and either clone them, which won't work, or force them under threat to sign over the whole trust back to them. But the machine recognises the stress and shuts it down. So we have put many things in. They're just two that has been mentioned. There's an awful lot of others that have been put in to prevent them ever accessing the trust in a wrong way again, and so that only people who are interested only in the benefit of all people, and some of the others that will stay here. Not all of them will stay here, but some of the others. Others being other beings. They are tired of this cabal order system as well. Do you have any info on John Howard? Not much, to be quite honest. A lot of Australia's problems are to do with its big brother, and I know a lot of Australians won't like that term, but it is the reality. Your big brother is New Zealand. Lots of fun and games there. It's been said things are happening faster than expected. Will this help speed up progress? It already has, but on the inner war, not the external, although you are seeing sufficient of it. I would appreciate a comment from Thomas on Alex Collier. I'm sure I've answered this at least 3 times, but the background of Alex Collier, he put in a lot of interesting information. Some of it verified, some of it you can't. But his real name is Ralph Graham, I think. It's some, like Ralph, it's not a common name. Amigron. It's not Alex Collier. And then he changed his name to Amigram. Why? Because on May the 3rd in 1991 he was arrested in California by inspectors of Internal Security Division in connection with a 4-count felony indictment that was handed down by a federal grand jury, and he went to jail. Now, Mr. Collier was a former IRS revenue officer, and he falsely claimed to be a certified public accountant and an enrolled actuary, and he knowingly used false social security numbers on tax documents. And so he went to prison 1991 and came out with a different name. Like I said, some of his information does tie in. But the fact, I wish I could remember his middle name. It wasn't a common name, like Ralph is not a common name. He had a middle name with a not common name, and Amagron, I doubt anyone's ever heard of it. So what are the chances of, let's say the middle name is Henry, of a Ralph Henry Amagron dying but staying alive? What are the chances there is two Ralph Henry Amagrons? Because in 2007, Ralph Henry Amagron died, according to public record. In 2009, another person by the name of Ralph Henry Amagron also died. What are the chances there's three people of that name? And that's why Alex Collier was missing. And then in comes new Alex Collier with a completely different mindset and fear program. We're all going to die by Nibiru. No, it's been pushed back, a bit like the RV. Then he does conferences for money. He said he was sleeping in a car, and yet I know one person who sent him $5,000 twice in the space of a year. Then he announces in his conference that Nibiru has been blown up. Yes, a long time ago. 3 months later, Nibiru's coming back again in February of this year. But come and pay more for my conference. That's my opinion on Alex Collier. The real one died in either 2007 and 2009, but the chances of three people being called Ralph Amagron is slim to none. Opinion on monatomic gold. It used to be used for time travel. I don't know too much about Ormus. Maybe it was something similar. What's all going on in Britain? Do you think we'll get Brexit? No, I told you that on election night. They'll just stringle along and stringle along and stringle along. And then the people get bored of it. And then they wrap it into a small font on page 1463 of a bill, and people have no option. That's how it works. I've done that one. What's the status of Fukushima? It was cleaned up within a month of the event. That's the status of Fukushima. And all the rest is other events. What's your latest info and thoughts on the synths matrix extras theory? Like I said, it's not proven that synths are 100% real. The observations tell us it is. Whether it's 85% synths also remains to be seen. What I will tell people to do is go and watch the movie. It's just come out on Netflix called Extinction, and then come back with your opinions. You may be surprised what they put out. Extinction. I've been in this earthly body 50 years and I hope to see real peace on this planet in my lifetime. Is it possible? Absolutely. Tide's turned. No going back. There's still ugliness, lots of it to remove, but what's your definition of inner work? Well, it's the same as the shadow stuff. It's all linked. The shadow is more integrating your shadow aspect. And sometimes people have other beings in their shadow, which they have to clear. Now, the inner work is the traumas that have taken place in your life, the insecurities that you have, the crimes that have been committed against you and those you've committed against others. None of us are angels. Maybe we don't want to be, given most of them, if not all of them, fell, and maybe we are all the fallen angels. Something for people to ponder on that. So, what happens is, over your lifetime, if you don't deal with things, and how you can tell you haven't is how you react to certain situations. So if someone at work says, you're stupid, for argument's sake, and they keep saying it, and it keeps bothering you, there's an inner trauma in there that you haven't dealt with. It's like people saying to me, you're a conspiracy nut. And I go, really? You need to look in the mirror, because what you're seeing is a complete illusion. You know, it doesn't bother me what they call me. You want to call me a conspiracy theorist? Fine. I'll show you facts. Can they produce theirs? So, you know, there's people who have been damaged, where they've lost their children or they've lost their loved ones in traumatic events. That holds a negative frequency because it's collecting in you. And if you keep collecting negative frequencies, which are then added to by negative people around you, because you have too much negativity frequency contained within the vessel, you then attract other negative people to you. Look around you. Who are the people you mix with? Are they all negative, moaning, complaining, my life is crap, woe is me? Because you'll find you're the same. And it means you haven't done your own inner work. Otherwise, you wouldn't be reacting to certain things. If certain things get you angry, then you have an inner trauma that you haven't dealt with. And the key is to pull those traumas forward and deal with them, process it, cry if that's what it makes you do. Forgive yourself, forgive the person who did whatever to you, and let it go. And I mean, let it go. Physically release it from the vessel. Will you forget things? No, you don't forget. But you can't let it eat you away either. So there's all these extra frequencies coming in, and the source energy. How are you going to absorb any of them if your whole vessel is full of trauma or victimhood? You're not going to get any. How, if your coffee cup is full, how are you going to tip more in? No, you're going to spill it all over the place, which then creates chaos. Because once you've filled the vessel up too much, that's when people go into depression. was he just kept knocking away, putting it to one side. I'm not addressing it. Well, that's a lack of personal responsibility. There's nobody else who's going to fix that problem except you. You start releasing the traumas you've gone through. People calling you stupid, people calling you weak, and all the other names, and the insecurities. You start letting them go, and suddenly the people of that ilk all disappear. Why? Because you're operating on a different frequency. Then all the source energies can come in, all the better frequencies, and suddenly you're on a completely different path. Not the one of woe is me, I'm the victim all my life. No. Because the harsh truth and reality is, most of that you brought on yourself. I played the victim for the first 30 years of my life, so I know from experience. Has it been discussed local limited government or councils and eliminate the Fed altogether? Well, he mentioned in a recent show that Trump was going after the Fed. We'll see. What might be the true and real agenda of burning down California with the use of directed energy weapons? We're not getting any sort of details on that other than what I put out 4 years ago. I told people they were emptying out California 4 years ago. I'm not seeing anything different now 4 years later. There is a war going on down there as well, between us and them. So we have to, I don't know the real details, and that's just speculating, but there is a war going on down there. And of course the other speculation, which I've mentioned previously, is, from what I gather, and it may or may not be true, the cabal sold the whole west coast off to Asia, and some of those now want to take over that land. Time will tell. Questions about M and how long he was here. A long time. I'd rather not discuss that entity. We're still dealing with the fallout of his insidious psychopathic program, which has been passed on to the order and the clowns. How, if at all, is belief in a religion different to belonging to a cult? It's a program. Well, you know, religion was an experiment. Cult has multiple connotations. Most people think it, the Waco cult and the other Stargate cult, where they all committed suicide. You can look at it, every group, and THI has been called a cult. It's how you interpret it. But religion and the more extreme cults are all essentially about following one character, and it's not the one you should be following. Are you planning another show with Madeline? Yes, Madeline's been busy moving. I've been busy moving, and there's a lot going on in both of our lives, and I'm sure we'll get to part 2 soon. Will the declaration treaty hand-delivered by Miss Spanner to the President Trump on the 27th of January be posted someplace. Well, two things wrong with that. A, it was not the Declaration Treaty, it was the Sovereignty document. And B, it was not hand-delivered by Kim herself, because Kim is in lockdown because of the clowns. I'll ask again. We may put a portion of it out and some pieces of it redacted, which you won't like, but at least you'll see, may get to see the gist of it. We may be able to put the whole lot out. We've got more important things than putting documents out, but it is being looked at, and once it gains momentum, maybe then will be the time we can put it out. We may put it out next week, we'll see. Is there the same interference going on now for channelers? Channelers is a rogue AI, Gray's Mantid program, no matter what people say. Agency also. They are able to set up and mimic a certain channel and seed information. So I don't recommend listening to or taking part in channeling either. Remote viewers or psychics in general, it depends on the individual. This will be the last question before I do a finishing piece. I recently, for the questions that I haven't answered, was a lot this week. They will go in next week, so please don't put them back in again. Just gives more work for Holly. She has enough to do. I recently listened to a podcast with Hayden Ellis. An element of his story made me think of my husband's story. When he was around age 5 to 10, he used to fly with the blue beings who he felt at home with, and he enjoyed flying with them. He was also visited by a mantis he only just found out in the past few years, and identified what this creature was, and that creature would fill him with fear and paralyze him. My question is, do you know about these blue beings and the mantids? Yeah. As for the blue aliens, that is a BS program, pure and simple. Have there been blue beings? Yes. There's 3 to my knowledge. And one of them is the Cygnus Alpha group. There's one of the 3 Lyran groups that were blue, and also the planet Nehuia, which is more like a moon, also had light blue skinned people. They're more commonly known to the people in India, which is why they draw the blue faces. So that's the 3 that I'm aware of. But as for blue avians, forget that nonsense. PSYOP. Mantids. Oh boy. People, I myself included, have a healthy dislike for Anunnaki and the Draco. Although the Draco are not the Anunnaki. It's just a common term. There's 5 different types of Anunnaki, but it came under an umbrella group. But the mantids are the brains. You look at how ants work, and it's really extraordinary how they build things and how they all work together. They can cross water by forming, all joining together. What they do is combine their PSI field, and they all take turns of being underwater, and they all get across with the eggs. It's extraordinary intelligence, and they're the brains behind the AI. And they're the real brains behind the Draco. The Draco are just thugs, in essence. More intent on war and destruction. And that works in some cases, but other times you have to be more clever, and that's where the mantids come in. And they both did use the greys as the slaves to do all the dirty work. So the greys were running the old AI. Well, the greys, or certain ones of them, are now tired of being used as slaves. In fact, most now they're all realising they've all been used as slaves one way or another. Now, as for the mantid, they're the only group, to my knowledge, that have not been cordial in the meetings. And yes, they're unpleasant. They're badly unpleasant. Certainly the queens. Not nice. They need to step off their pedestal, or like the ants on this world, they'll find a bigger boot to crush their heads. Where are we? Last piece before we finish. And this is going to cover a few things. Things are happening on many levels, and I mean many levels. People just think it's politics or it's banking. That's just but two. It's happening on many levels, it's happening on many planes, it's happening on many dimensions also. And it's happening below your feet. Now, the way I envision it is it's a row of snowballs. Some are small, some are very large, on the peak of a mountain. And some have already started to roll downhill. And boy, are they gathering pace. They can't stop them. There's others that are rocking on the precipice. Eventually they will tip and will fall and will ride the path down the hill. And what we'll have when all those tip over is an opportunity to finally fix the world for the better, for all of us. But I want in this piece to focus on us. What are we going to do? Will we wait for the others to fix it, or will we strive to get off our collective backsides and create a new way of being and acting? Will we sit and wait for the politicians to be arrested, or realise their bearing on life is actually minimal and bordering on totally irrelevant, like the piece I did earlier? Will the legal people in our community continue to argue over the name of the law or the parameters of it, or, as in some cases, still operate for a program or a faction, or just drop all illegal BS and start operating under the golden rule? Because if all of us operated under the golden rule, we wouldn't need laws except for business and trade. Now, what we will eventually experience, and some already have, and have worked through it, is more and more low vibrational people will now start to interact with you in a negative way. Why? Because it's their final assault, and I mean final assault, to throw you out of sync. People raging, people being rude, people being angry, people being argumentative with no apparent reasoning behind it, people being service to self. Envy will raise its head, which is another trait of service to self. engaging with these people, as I warned back in a show in November of 2016, is a pointless exercise. You will not win with low vibrational frequency people. You always lose something. And what most people neglect that you lose is your life force or your energy levels on a soul level and also the physical level. And some say, well, I convinced them on some things, but they countered back with others. Yes, because they are vampirizing your energy. That's how they operate. Like a child that always wants attention and being fed. Then you do it, and then they want more, and then the cycle continues. Most listening to the show are the adult. And I don't mean an adult in age terms either. What I mean by that is in thinking and frequency waves. You have morphed from being a child in an adult body to being nearer an adult in an adult body on the different planes, not just the physical. So these types of people and attacks will ramp up now, as they haven't heeded the warnings, messages, or really done any of their inner or shadow work. Because if they had, they wouldn't be exhibiting the above traits. They've all had plenty of time, and way too much of our time, to get a handle on things. It's now way past too late to integrate them into a better way of thinking and a higher vibration without tipping them over the edge mentally. They're going to have to face it. They chose to ignore reality. We've tried our damnedest. Don't ever feel guilty because you weren't able to wake people out of their self-consumed mentality. Families and loved ones are the hardest for us all to ignore, but can you allow yourself to be sieved on a daily or weekly basis by people who in essence are still in child mode? It's your choice, but continuing that exercise will come at a cost for you. If you accept those costs, that's fine. As I said, it's ultimately down to you how much you tolerate being energy loosed. But if you don't, you have all the hard choices to make of your own path. This was never going to be easy. The journey to get here has been hard and an arduous one, filled with many potholes and side streets. But they underestimated the sheer will, tenacity, creativeness of the organic souls that are left in here at their cost. They badly underestimated us. We have come so far, and yet face our greatest task in the future still to come. How to operate with each other, including non-humans, in a way where we are not competing or consuming each other's life force. How to be personally responsible, which for many of us is for the first time in our lives. How as parents or governments we learn to not stifle the children or the people, but to teach and guide them to operate in a better way. Learn how collecting or hoarding for the you, when many others have nothing, is not the way we need to be. Learn how to interact in harmony with nature, learn vocational and life skills, and learn how to be content and happy again. You'd be surprised at how many people are just not content and happy because they've forgotten how to be that way. and more importantly, learn how to develop your own abilities and creativity that has been stifled and in some cases eradicated for so long. And the ultimate goal is for our whole species to become an adult-based species and cast off the undereducated, childlike savages tags we have been labelled with currently. We can only do that if we're all partaking in fixing themselves and encourage others to do likewise. We are now entering in totally uncharted waters, and we stand on the edge of enormous change. Learn to embrace change, not fear it. Life is supposed to be about experience, and yet so many get stuck in repeating the same jobs, lifestyle, relationships, homes and countries that you know haven't really enhanced your lives, only kept you in stasis. Time for the real humanity to wake out of its slumber and scream the ending song. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams.